Edward, a chief hematologist for Bromley Marks Pharmaceuticals, goes to work in a world run by vampires. After a security scanner in an elevator confirms his identity, he walks down a hallway. He stops to look through a large glass window at the company's blood farm, a massive chamber where thousands of humans are kept unconscious in pods, their blood being harvested. This blood is vital, as vampires who don't consume it degenerate into monstrous creatures called subsiders. Edward, looking disturbed by the sight, continues on to his lab. In a dimly lit room, a young girl with dark hair writes a letter and places it on her bed. She walks out of a large house and sits on the lawn waiting for the sun. As the sun rises, her eyes glow a fiery orange. She screams as the sunlight hits her, causing her body to burst into flames and turn to ash. The world is now run by vampires, who have adapted society for a nocturnal existence with covered walkways and subway systems. News reports on public screens announce a critical blood shortage, and propaganda posters with a vampire Uncle Sam urge citizens to capture human. On the street, a monstrous, devolved vampire begs for blood before being violently subdued by police, while others wait on a train platform for their nightly commute. Later, at a meeting in a dark boardroom, the commissioner gives a presentation to Charles Bromley, Edward, and other top officials. On a large screen, he shows a series of black and white photos of a vampire inmate who is deprived of human blood. The photos document the inmate's rapid transformation, starting with elongated ears and ending with him becoming a monstrous, bat-like creature known as a subsider. The commissioner warns that these subsiders are becoming a serious problem. Bromley, smoking a cigar, adds that with less than 5% of the human population remaining, they only have a month's supply of blood left before all vampires begin to starve and change. Bromley takes Edward to his private office, where an assistant serves them coffee. Edward stirs his cup, revealing a reddish-brown liquid mixed with blood, but he doesn't drink it. Bromley tells Edward how he was cured of terminal cancer after turning into a vampire, but his daughter refused to turn and ran away, seeing him as a monster. Convinced that Edward pities humans, Bromley insists they must start testing the blood substitute to save the human race. In the lab, Edward informs his colleague Christopher of the order. The test begins with Bromley and his associates watching from a viewing gallery. A vampire soldier volunteers and is injected with the synthetic blood. At first, the soldier feels fine as his temperature rises, but he suddenly vomits and convulses violently. As his body breaks out in horrific blisters, the medical team tries to sedate him, but he explodes, splattering blood all over the room and the viewing window. That night, Edward drives home, smoking, as the car radio reports on riots caused by the blood shortage. He scratches his ear and feels something is wrong, then pulls down the visor mirror to see his ears beginning to elongate. Distracted, he narrowly avoids a collision, causing the other car to swerve and crash into a transformer, which explodes in a shower of sparks. Edward gets out to help, but is suddenly shot in the hand with an arrow. He sees a group of humans getting out of the crashed vehicle, their leader, Audrey, aiming a crossbow at him. As police sirens approach, Edward tells them to get into his car and activates the daytime driving mode, blacking out the windows. When the police arrive, he pulls the arrow from his hand and tells the officers that the humans ran away. While hiding in Edward's car, Audrey finds his discarded lab coat and discovers his ID badge. She sees his name, Ed Dalton, his job as a hematologist, and his date of birth. After the police drive away, the humans get out of the car. Audrey wishes him a happy birthday before she and her group leave. Edward then drives home to his gated community, where a loudspeaker announces that sunrise is 1 hour away. Inside his apartment, a security alert sounds, and he finds his younger brother Frankie has let himself in. Frankie mocks Edward for not celebrating his birthday, but Edward dismisses it, saying he's turned 35 10 times. Frankie then reveals an expensive bottle of pure human blood he brought to celebrate. He pours 2 glasses, but Edward angrily refuses to drink. Frankie accuses his brother of hypocrisy, since Edward works for a company that farms humans. Edward yells back that he's trying to find a blood substitute to save them, and that he hates Frankie's job hunting innocent people. In a rage, Edward grabs the bottle of human blood and pours it down the kitchen sink. His brother Frankie tries to stop him, and during their struggle he smashes the bottle against a wall just as Frankie is about to leave. A monstrous, bat-like creature appears and begins licking the blood off the door. When Frankie reaches for a knife, the creature attacks, kicking him across the room. As Edward fends off the monster with a metal stool, Frankie crawls through the broken glass to get his knife. The creature leaps to the ceiling ceiling, but when it drops down, both brothers fight it off until Frankie decapitates it. The scene ends with police and forensics investigators arriving to examine the bloody aftermath. A security alert about an open back door wakes Edward from his sleep on the couch. He gets up to investigate and turns on a light, revealing a woman named Audrey aiming a crossbow directly at him. Lowering her weapon, she explains that she is looking for vampires to trust and needs his help, saying a blood substitute isn't a cure. Audrey hands him a small folded map, but a noise from upstairs makes Edward look away. When he turns back, she is gone. His brother Frankie appears on the stairs and asks who was there, but Edward says it was nothing. Later, a news report on a screen announces that investors are pulling their human stock from a major harvesting facility due to the dwindling supply. In his lab, Edward examines the hand-drawn map. The next morning, he activates his car's daytime driving mode and follows the map through the city to a remote, sunlit field where Audrey is waiting. Edward parks his black Chrysler under a large tree and steps out wearing a hat and sunglasses. He cautiously approaches another man, Lionel, who is standing near a red Ford Mustang. Lionel reveals he was once a vampire but has been cured, letting a shocked Edward feel his beating heart. As Edward asks how, Frankie suddenly appears with a soldier and holds Audrey at crossbow point. When military trucks arrive in the distance, Audrey shoves Frankie into the direct sunlight, and his skin begins to smoke and burn. The soldiers open fire, destroying Lionel's car, forcing Edward, Audrey, and Lionel to run for Edward's car and flee the scene. The group escapes in the car as military Humvees pursue them, shooting at the vehicle. Sunlight streams through the newly formed bullet holes, forcing Audrey and Lionel to try and cover them. When a bullet destroys the car's exterior camera, the screens inside go blank, leaving Edward driving blind. Lionel quickly takes the wheel from the back seat, peering through a small hole to navigate while Edward hides from the light. They speed across a dilapidated wooden bridge, but the first Humvee that follows is too heavy. The bridge collapses, and the military vehicle falls into the ravine below, exploding in a massive fireball and stranding the remaining pursuers. After escaping, they stop the damaged car by a river at night. Lionel explains that he used to customize cars for daytime driving. He recalls an accident where his vintage Chevrolet crashed, throwing him out on fire and into the water. Showing his heavily scarred face, he says he emerged from the water human again. Audrey tells Edward they need his help to safely recreate this cure. The scene then shifts to a sleek office, where a man named Bromley tells Edward's brother, Frankie, that he did the right thing by reporting him. Bromley promises no charges will be filed if Edward returns to work. When asked if he likes being a vampire, Frankie, wearing his military uniform, says he's better at it than he ever was at being human. While driving to a safe location, Audrey notices Edward struggling with his thirst. Seeing his pained expression and pointed ears, she cuts her own arm and pours some blood into a paper cup for him. After a moment of hesitation, Edward gives in to his hunger and drinks it. They soon arrive at a vineyard at night, where they are met by a man named Jarvis and a group of other human survivors. Inside, Audrey introduces Edward to Senator Turner, a vampire who explains that he wants to help rebuild the human race. The scene then shifts to a subway station, where a man at a coffee stand complains that his drink is weak. The waitress points to a sign stating they are only allowed to serve 5% blood per cup. Enraged, the man grabs a bag of blood, rips it open with his teeth, and splatters it everywhere, causing the other vampires nearby to erupt into a violent frenzy. The mob attacks the coffee stand until police in riot gear arrive and use electric prods to subdue them. The next morning, Edward draws blood from Lionel's hand to test in the lab. As Edward examines the sample under a microscope, he asks what it felt like to become human again. Lionel describes it as a bolt of lightning that kick-started his heart. Edward theorizes that the cure involves controlling the burning effect of sunlight, while the blood is still inside the body. Later, when Edward steps out of the lab, some of the humans see him and nervously move away. Audrey approaches him and says that even though they are frightened, they still have hope that he can help. Edward then confesses that his brother, Frankie, is the one who turned him into a vampire against his will. He notices several large metal wine fermentation tanks nearby, which Audrey confirms are airtight. Inside one of the tanks, they discover an extraction fan that can remove oxygen, and they begin modifying it for the experiment. That night, Jarvis's convoy of rescued humans, including a young woman named Allison, makes its way toward the vineyard. Suddenly, a sniper's bullet shreds a tire on one of the convoy's vans, forcing it to a stop. The humans grab their crossbows and prepare to fight, but they are quickly surrounded by soldiers. A battle breaks out, with arrows flying and explosions erupting in the dark. During the chaos, a young woman named Allison radios the vineyard for help. but she is captured mid-sentence. The army uses her radio signal to track the vineyard's location on a GPS device. Back at the vineyard, the other survivors scramble to evacuate. Edward, however, refuses to leave, determined to proceed with his experiment before sunrise. Audrey warns him it could kill him, but he insists, and Lionel decides to stay and help. Elsewhere, Allison awakens in her father Bromley's office. After he tells her that her friends are gone, she stabs him with a glass letter opener during a hug. She tries to escape but is knocked unconscious by a soldier. Bromley then looks down and realizes he is bleeding. The next morning, Audrey sits at a desk with monitors while Lionel helps Edward inside a large metal tank. On Audrey's countdown, a hatch opens and a beam of sunlight sets the shirtless Edward on fire. After 2 brief attempts, they let him burn for longer. His heart monitor flatlines, then restarts with a steady human heartbeat, showing he has been cured. At that moment, military trucks arrive, and soldiers in tactical gear storm the building. Edward, Audrey, and Lionel quickly hide inside a large wooden wine vat. Elsewhere, a wounded Bromley gives his son Frankie an order. Frankie goes to Allison's cell, pins her against a wall, and bites her neck as she screams. After the trio emerges from the wine vat at the vineyard, Edward steps into the morning sun and is shocked to realize he is no longer a vampire. As they prepare to leave, Lionel uncovers a black Pontiac Trans Am with "From the Ashes Springs New Life" written on the side. Meanwhile, at his company, Bromley discovers his human harvesting farm is empty and is told his daughter Allison is refusing to eat. When he enters her cell, he finds she has mutilated herself and transformed into a monstrous subsider. Blaming him, she attacks and bites him before guards drag her away. The trio arrives at a remote cabin, only to find a massacre of dead humans inside. While they sit outside in despair, Edward insists he knows someone else who can help. Elsewhere, captured subsiders are publicly executed by being exposed to sunlight. Frankie, now a soldier, watches in horror as Allison is among those who burn to death, and he closes his eyes in regret. Christopher returns to his modern home to find Edward, Audrey, and Lionel waiting with crossbows. He is shocked that Edward is human again. Edward explains they have a cure, not a substitute, and asks for his help. When the phone rings, Christopher excuses himself but leaves the line open for the company to listen in. Realizing the betrayal, the group is ambushed by soldiers. Audrey is tranquilized and captured, but Edward and Lionel escape into a subway tunnel. In an old garage, a subsider attacks them until Frankie appears and kills it. Crying, Frankie confesses he only turned Edward to save his life. But when Lionel gets close, the smell of human blood overwhelms Frankie, and he bites Lionel's neck. Edward tackles his brother and aims his crossbow at him, but he can't bring himself to shoot. Sometime later, Edward calmly walks into the Bromley Marks building, where his human heartbeat immediately sets off an alarm. Security guards quickly surround him in the elevator lobby and escort him to Charles Bromley's office. Inside, Audrey is tied to a chair with her wrist bleeding, while Bromley sips her blood from a wine glass. Edward pretends he wants to be a vampire again, causing Audrey to look at him in betrayal. Bromley laughs, telling Edward he's no longer needed because a blood substitute is in production. After calling Edward a coward, Edward fires back, taunting Bromley about being too weak to turn his own daughter. Enraged, Bromley lunges forward and bites Edward's neck. As Bromley drinks, he begins to convulse and transform back into a human. Edward reveals that his blood is the cure, explaining that a cured vampire's blood can turn other vampires human. Panicked, Bromley crawls to a wall panel and triggers an alarm. Vampire soldiers rush to the elevator and find Bromley tied to a chair, now fully human. The starving soldiers immediately lose control and attack him, tearing him apart inside the elevator. In the lobby, Edward and Audrey are surrounded by a squad of vampire soldiers. Suddenly, a car crashes through the building's glass wall and plows through the soldiers. The driver is Frankie, who gets out and yells for Edward to run before he is swarmed and torn apart by the hungry soldiers. As Edward screams in horror, a guard grabs Audrey. Edward rushes into a security room where he fights 2 other guards. Audrey frees herself and helps Edward kill the last guard. They then watch the security monitors, seeing that the soldiers who fed on Frankie's cured blood are turning human. The remaining vampire soldiers, seeing them as human prey, immediately turn on their former comrades, causing a massive bloodbath in the lobby. Edward and Audrey step into the lobby, which is now filled with dead bodies. A few surviving soldiers who have turned back into humans are left standing in shock. Suddenly, Christopher emerges from an elevator and shoots the remaining men. He then points his gun at Edward and Audrey, telling them he cannot let a cure happen. Just as he is about to fire, an arrow strikes him in the chest, and he explodes in a ball of fire. Lionel appears holding a crossbow. Audrey runs to him and they embrace, while Edward kneels beside his brother's body. The 3 then get into a black car and drive away down a road into the sunrise. Thanks for watching.